Jeff Bradshaw, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, man.
I really appreciate you coming in. You're the first person who ever brought an outline, so this is going to be helpful for me. Normally, I'm the one who has to take the notes. But Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to over the last couple of years, almost decade plus?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been an entrepreneur. I guess that's a really cool code buzzword now for people, and the millennials want to be entrepreneurs or fighter pilots, I guess. Whatever the best is. But so I feel like I jumped into that before it was a trendy buzzword, right? I think when I look back and, we talked a little about the arc of the whole life and doing this, like even when I was a kid, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman or anything like that. I just wanted to own my own business and kind of be my own boss and make my own way, right? So for the last 32 years, wow. I like to say I haven't had to get a real job. So it's been good, yeah. But it started in childhood. Like I said, I think my number one motivation was I hated being poor, right? So, and I say that not begrudging those who were well off and made money. It was more like I just wanted to study that to see, hey, what are these people doing that really makes them a little different? That they have some secret or some trick that we don't know about. And so, I was never like, oh, I begrudge you for having more than me. Type thing, but I'd really love to learn from you, right? So started that kind of thought process. I'm the oldest of 7, and I think I suffer greatly from first child syndrome.
Oh, the first.
Yeah, first child syndrome of 7. I think.
What's that syndrome that they forget about you after they get you out?
Well, they forget about you, but I think if, I can throw out the standard things about it, like, most of the astronauts and overachievers are first childs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, yeah, you get that little ambitious bug going. And I think that is because after child number 2 through 7 comes along, you don't get a lot of attention.
That one's a lot.
Yeah. So you're really just, you got to take care of yourself. Right. So, and I also think it throws out a lot of, if you have them in you, and I kind of go back and forth on this, are leaders made or are they born? And whether I was made or born, I haven't figured that out yet, but I had no choice but to lead my other 6 siblings, right? So my dad worked the swing shift at a steel mill in Mansfield, where I'm from. So, 2 of the 3 weeks, he wasn't there for the evening shift or the night shift, and then he'd sleep. So when you've got, a 7 Wildcats running around, it was more like, okay, who's the leader of the pack? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because both of my brothers probably could have beat me up pretty easily that were younger, but I had the big brother syndrome over them, which was good.
Yeah, so, just the confidence.
Like, it was. That's it. So you build confidence. That's another good word, I think, that comes out of it, because you've taken care of yourself for some time. Mom's not really going to take care of you when the babies are running around, right? So I think that kind of set me on the path, right? And by default, not all of my family, but by default, I was a hard worker, right? So
what did mom do?
Mom was a homemaker the entire
7
time.
kids.
Yeah. That
what
was
else
the day.
Are you gonna do?
That was the day, right? My dad was a steel worker. My mom stayed at home. It was the classic. I like to say that my childhood, I had a fantastic childhood, I think, right? I was like, hey, I see all these people who have these stories of they were this, they were that. And I'm like, should I feel guilty? I had a fantastic childhood. Or as I like to say, I was blissfully ignorant of all the things. And I see that in my kids today, right? Like kids today my kids are 24 and 26, and they grew up with cell phones and they know everything bad that happens in the world. I knew nothing bad. Right. So,
and you probably didn't even know what your town was like compared to other towns. Because I don't know if you know this, but I went to Ashland University.
Oh, wow.
So I know Mansfield.
Yeah, right, man.
But people don't sing the praises of Mansfield. It's not to say it's a bad town, but it's an industrial town, and it's probably at this point like sort of like a industrial town that's losing some of that industry. Wasn't there a GM plant that's no longer there?
You've summed it up nicely. It was, there was a steel mill there. I worked there in the summers, 80 hours a week, saved every penny. And then I didn't work for, 9 months of the year at the Ohio State. But back then it was just a small T. It wasn't the, right? So, But, first job was paperboy, Mansfield
Nice.
News Journal, right? So, immediately you're thrown into the jungle and you got to go collect money from people. Sometimes your neighbors don't want to pay, but you had to get up early in the morning, do the route, Sunday delivery. No 10-year-old wants to get up early Sunday morning and deliver papers, right?
It's funny because you're the second person that I've had on this podcast who did that as a kid. They were a paper boy.
Oh,
and
wow.
it seems like it was sort of formative for both you and my friend Dave Winham.
I think it is, I think it teaches you at a young age some discipline. And, I could say that I was proud to say that I read newspapers like every day of my life from the age of 9. And I don't really think newspapers are like they were back then when they actually had real reporters and you could learn a lot about what was going on. So it made me really cognizant of my little world in Mansfield. And you're right, it was GM, steel mill, Ohio Brass, heavy industrial base, blue collar, tough town, had an underbelly,
Mm-hmm.
carried on that underbelly, I think, in recent years, maybe cleaned up a little. One of my sisters is just retired, but she was the director of police records in Mansfield, right? And she knew everything that went on. And she's like, don't go out of the house,
Oh, really? Yeah.
Don't go to Walmart,
That's the ignorance is bliss. You're like, yeah, I don't know. It's a great town to me.
Well, she saw all the crimes, right? So it's like there's crime everywhere. It's a tough time out there right now. But actually, it's not a bad town now. It was a good town to grow up in and then go off. I think most of my friends either went north to Cleveland or the other half of us went south to Columbus, right? And it was interesting because that was two different cultures. The Cleveland was the kind of big, rugged city that it is, and Columbus was a growing town, so Columbus has really done a lot of stuff great now up to a point here. But so it was interesting, a little change there. But so my first serious job though was at Doherty's, Ohio at 71 and 13. You probably drove by it on your way to Ashland, but as a dishwasher.
Okay.
When I was 16, right? So, and I use this story with with some of my warehouse staff now, right? Like, look, this is just a cruddy warehouse job, right? And my cruddy job was a dishwasher. So, but in my mind, I was winning the gold medal of dishwashing every time I was there, right? So,
Yeah.
I'd hear the Olympic theme in my back of my head, and I'm washing those dishes as fast as I can because it was just my nature to do that, right? So, and I was making, I think, 95 cents an hour, 16 years old. That was big money though, right?
Yeah,
Well,
right.
it was other than the paperboy thing, it was some money, right? It was a steady job. So one day, Mr. Doherty, I like to remember this story. Mr. Doherty comes to me and he goes, "Hey, did you look in your paycheck today?" And I'm like, no, I had looked at my paycheck, right? He had given me a raise, right? He goes, "Well, I gave you a raise." He raised me to $1 from the 95 cents, which honestly just pissed me off. But, because I was like worth $1.25 for sure. Right? So I said, "Mr. Doherty, you don't understand me, do you, sir?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I'm not here for the money. I'm here to be the world's greatest dishwasher." So I tell that to my warehouse crew to say, "Hey, look, man, it's your 8 hours of your day. It's not my 8 hours of your day. Use your 8 hours to the best that you can. And I'll be the secondary beneficiary of that. You'll be the primary beneficiary." I think that motivates some people. Some people laugh, but it's a good little motivational thing.
My formative job was working at, you might know this place, Snyder Lance. It's Snyder's of Hanover is the pretzel
Yeah,
company.
the pretzel
right?
company, yeah.
But they also own a really big chocolate manufacturing facility in Ashland.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was working the second shift, so I would come in at 3 p.m. and stay until 1 a.m. in
Wow.
the sanitation department. So it's not like bathrooms. You're cleaning the whole warehouse from top to bottom, like spraying. We had a wet night where you would spray down all
Wow.
the machines. We'd have the full wetsuits, and it was formative to me for two reasons. One was it was just incredibly difficult, and I said to myself, like, okay, well, the work you're doing, because I was in college, I was going to college and I was also doing this for a period. The work that you're doing, like school and then the eventual job that you'll go out and get, it's not going to be like this. It's going to be very, very different. So, yeah, like you can always go, yeah, I'm working really hard in my office, but in the back of your mind, you're not working that hard. It's just a different type of work. The second thing that always stuck with me was I started on, and I came from a temp company, and there was like 4 or 5 other temps, and they knew like Alex wasn't going to get hired on. He's just a college kid. He's not trying to work here full time. But the other couple of guys, they were like at each other's throats to be hired on because this was the best job that they could imagine. Like they were like, it's 40 hours a week. It has benefits. It has health insurance. It has a 401k. Like, we're going to go as hard as we can to get this job. And I was like, this is a great job, you know? So that always stuck with me that these guys were just so willing to put everything on the line to take this job because for them, it was an excellent job. And I was like, wow, that's like a really interesting perspective to have that like they're going to go as hard as they can because this is like the thing that they want when, you know, there's definitely levels out there above and beyond that. But I always say, like, there's someone who will come into your job, your company, and they'll give it everything they got. Because I've seen it. I've seen those guys come in and give it everything they've got. So they exist. So sometimes when we're hiring and we're just like, we just can't find anybody who really wants this job. I'm like, there's somebody out there who's perfect for this and is going to like give us everything. We just got to keep looking. So that always stuck with me because I was like, you know, you can keep working harder, Alex, and you know, there's somebody out there who wants this job and wants to give you everything they got for this company.
No, I had the exact same experience. You know, my post dishwashing employment was at the steel mill in Mansfield. So, and this is funny because someone told me this before, and I remember it to be true. But people don't remember their salary amounts, but they remember their hourly amounts. And I can tell you that
that's true. Yeah, I was making $8.75 at Snyder Lance.
I was making $6.73 at Empire Detroit Steel.
You're probably high paid because mine was only like a decade ago.
Multiply that by 80 hours a week, and that's like big, big money. And it was exactly what you just said. There was a lot of guys who were like, "Oh man, I was going to go to college, but man, this is big money." And really, it was big money at that time, right? So I worked there the summers, and then I went to I started off, which was a good move by default on my part, at the Mansfield branch of OSU. Mm-hmm. And I continued to work through the summer, past the summer, which most guys went, but I could do it because I was working the evening shift and I had my classes from 11 to 3:30, and I could make the run across town. But eventually it got to where, hey, we're going to have to move you off and you'll have to quit college. And I'm like, oh, no, actually, I'm not going to quit college. I'm going to quit this job and go on to college. So, you know, I got through the formative years there at working at the mill. But I always appreciated that because I was able to make enough money. And you know, it made you really appreciate the older guys there who really, that was the very best thing they could do, right? And these guys were hard workers, super smart guys that were working in a steel mill, and they were running huge equipment. And at that time, you know, that was the job. If you got that, your family was secure, right? So fortunately, you know, I was ready to move forward, and it was there and a good opportunity. But, you know, you learn lessons on all of those jobs, right? You know, and you always remember that from the perspective of when you end up with employees, right? You know, like I have probably 375 employees now.
I was going to ask. That's a big team.
It is, you know. And one of my fun sayings is that the optimum number of employees is 1, and it's a downhill slide after that.
Yeah, right. Nobody agrees with you like yourself.
Yeah. So, you know, that's really part of the entrepreneurial evolution too. We can get into that a little bit, right? But you know, you look at, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, the normal thing you hear about entrepreneurs is, oh, you don't know how to delegate, right? Well, I never really had that problem. I could delegate. It was finding someone to delegate everything to, right? So,
finding someone smarter than us to do the work.
Yeah, that would do it like us, right? And I think you look at hiring someone, it's very natural. There's no other way to look at it at a certain point, right? It's purely an expense. That's it. You know, and what's the number one rule in business is you want to minimize your expense, right? So you pay them the least amount that you can, and you get exactly what you pay for, right? So you give them this job, and I'm talking way back, you know, 25, 30 years ago when we first started hiring a few people. And, you get what you pay for, but then you realize that of what I wanted them to do, they did 25%, and then I did the other 75% anyway, kind of a thing. And then I think one of the evolutions for being an entrepreneur is that you realize that the real approach to that is that you invest in your employees, and your investment gives you a return, right? Usually that investment means pay more. But a lot of times it means just recognize more and let them know that they're valued, and because they were. Everyone that helped us has been valued. And I think there's a book alone on just I probably have had thousands of employees over the years, right? And there were some epic characters there for sure, right? Yeah.
We've had a couple in our just short time, and we've only had 40, 50 employees. So if you're talking thousands.
Yeah. Oh no, it's an interesting study in human nature.
Yes.
It was a shock to me to have people come into my world who didn't make the most fundamental decisions in their own best interest, right? And it was hard for me to grasp that for a while, because I was, Mr. Gung Ho, do my own thing and push, and here were people that kind of practiced self-destructive behaviors right in front of you to their own detriment, right? And you try to help them, and some people you help, some people you move on. You can't save every starfish, but it's a very interesting study in human nature. Like I said, it's like it's really. People say, what degree is best if you're going to be a business owner? Accounting, finance, marketing? And I'm like, child psychology.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I just had this conversation on this podcast. I think so many people that you and I probably interact with that are, middle class, upper middle class, they think about like the problems of the world, but they don't think about this group of people that you and I have met who do those self-destructive behaviors. And it's like a fundamentally different approach to life in some ways for those people. And maybe they haven't had better examples out there, but a lot of like upper middle class people, they're just like, no, people like that don't exist. And it's like, no, you just don't interact with them,
right?
Because they don't live in your neighborhood and they don't work at your company, but they're out there. And I think that has given me a really good perspective on people also, because you do meet people that you're like, Steve, how'd you lose all that weight? And he's like, stack or 2 pills and cigarettes. And you're like, oh, like that's not what I thought you were going to say. And that's not how I would do it. And that's not the life that I live. But, it's just a different approach to life. And that's been an interesting thing for me to see those people. And I think that's been helpful for me forming my opinion on what large groups of people are like, because they're not necessarily like you and I always.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned I'm the oldest of 7, and I think in the early years, before 20, when they were still young, I found myself probably really tough on them, just saying, you got to do this, you got to go to college, you got to be smarter, blah, blah, blah. And I think like maybe post-college, 23, like I woke up one day and said, oh, wait a minute, they don't need to listen to what I say. They're going to live their own lives. And I literally stopped doing that. And I was happier right away. This is my own family members, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were happier right away as well, right? So, we're a really close family, and I think from our childhood experiences and all, but that was a good lesson that other people are going to live their lives. Most people, I think, will try to make good decisions for themselves, right? But when you're an employer, you get an intimate look at those who do and those who don't, right? And whether you want to or not, I think. And, the kind of standard thing is, well, I have an open door policy. Just come on in and talk to me, right? So, well, that goes pretty good for a while. And then, the door's open too much. And sometimes, they don't really want to hear the advice. So I think I sort of just said, if you want me to talk to you about it, I will. But we have an employer-employer relationship. I'm not going to meddle, try to make you do something you don't want to do, but we'll help you out in every way we can. Jumping ahead to COVID, what COVID reminded me pretty harshly, as it did with a lot of business owners, is, at the end of the day, you can't do anything without people. So you gotta you got to get to know them, and they come into your lives. You cross paths. Like I tell some of my people, I'm like, look, what are there now? 7 billion people in the world. Do you think we just cross paths randomly? Or was there some reason that you're here and I'm here? Somehow I'm helping you. Somehow you're helping me. Is that random? Is the universe that random? Or is there some little thing there that we were here together?
Yeah.
And so it's all in all, I would tell you, it's been rewarding. I think at a certain, maybe I'll say this a couple of times, maybe at a certain age, you see that as an entrepreneur and a business owner, that no, it's not really always about making the most money. It's about doing the right thing, and it's about helping people around you, as hard as that can be sometime, or as rewarding as that can be sometime, right? So, they have their kids, they have weddings and so on and so forth, and life gets in the way, and doctor's appointments. And it was interesting because as a small employer, and here too, Alex, FedEx builds a 550,000 square foot warehouse down the street, and you're like, oh no, all my employees are going to go there, right? So we actually picked up employees from that. And the reason I think we picked up 5 employees that are good employees. And the reason I got was I tried it down there, felt like a number.
Cog in the wheel.
I saw your sign. So, and then, you got Amazon that's going to pay $4 or $5 more an hour. And that's a lot of money more.
Yeah.
But you got to work 4:45 p.m. to 4:45 a.m., right? So our only way to compete was to say, listen, okay, work-life balance is not just a trendy buzzword here. We know you have kids. We know you're sick. We know your kids have got to go to doctor appointments. We know you have this or that. We're not going to fire you. Just don't have the problem every Friday at 3 and you're really going to happy hour, and we'll be okay, right? So,
or just not invite us, right?
Right. So, that was our competitive angle to get people, right? And you had to follow through because people figure out if you're lying about that pretty quickly. So, it's a very, I think we're lucky, and people come in, and outside consultants will come in and say, wow, you guys have a lot of passionate employees, and they all have opinions, right? So, and that's true. So you get some of that. I mean, if you get your employees involved, and you'll hear this, that guy thinks that he owns the business. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I love the fact that guy thinks he owns the business. Or that girl thinks she owns the business, or she knows how to do this better than me. I'm like, hey, come on in and tell me. Because if you're right, I'm going to change right away, right? So it's a lot of give and take on the human element. The worst thing that gets in the way, of course, is all the employee regulations and, the fund payroll taxes and all those kind of things that the heavy-handed governmental take of all that. And, you get along with that. I think you may know I was a CPA in my past life, right? Which I think, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but that helped me greatly in being an entrepreneur, because one of the lessons you learn right away is don't spend the employee taxes that you collect, because the IRS takes that personally. You really got to do it. Yeah, that's not yours, and they will come after you. And there's no such thing as a corporate veil. Yeah. So that gave me some fundamental basis on how to survive the first years. Like if you're a startup business, I think the statistic is 80% of startup businesses fail in the first year. And that's, I'm like, that's because 90% of them shouldn't have started. Yeah. Right. So,
well, and that keeps going every year that you roll that out. It's like the remaining, 10, 20% of businesses at year 3, another third of those have fallen off. And then at year 5, 2/3 of those have fallen off. And at year 10, 90% of those have fallen off. And those stats just keep on going. So for a business like yours to kind of pop out the other side, I mean, it's amazing. And maybe if you just would quickly, in your own words, tell us what the business is and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. Well, if there was a corporate category called gypsies, that might be what we are, right? So
well, you had a big element that was kind of traveling. That's sort of how it started, correct?
Yeah. I'll give you the whole, the 32-year arc was really, and we can go back maybe if we have time and talk about what got me to the beginning of that.
No, I
32
definitely
point.
do
Yeah.
want to.
But we started where we've had a number of names. The names that we're operating under now are Discount Fashion Warehouse, right, which is a off-price retailer.
And if you're in Ohio, you've definitely driven past a Discount Fashion Warehouse at some point.
We're going on our 17th store now,
Yeah.
all in Ohio.
Amazing.
It's amazing how many women know about Discount Fashion Warehouse, right? But there's still a lot of women that don't know about Discount Fashion Warehouse. It's a secret to some degree, but I'll touch on that a little bit. But going back to the beginning, when I came out of limited stores, my partner and we were doing wholesale under a company called K Amelia Enterprises, which was strangely enough named after one of our friends' grandmother. The guy was a Greek, but so that was us doing wholesale to TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Burlington Coat Factory, and so I came out of limited, and I knew a lot of the people there. So we bought deals from them. I think I may have told you the story. The first deal we ever did, right? So was the 50,000 jean deal.
And just to take one step back, at Limited, or excuse me, at your previous employer, that's kind of similar to what you were also doing, right? You were helping them kind of liquidate this inventory that was overstock, if you will. Is that right?
Yeah. Let me probably go back on that for a second because that'll give a little more clarity. But after Ohio State, CPA, went into public accounting, did public accounting for 4 years, really loved it. Went on a recruiting dinner, was sent on a recruiting dinner back to Ohio State, and sat at the table with 5 kids from the Ohio State accounting program, 2 really higher up guys at Limited, and me from the public accounting firm, right? So this is a little sidebar story, but so the accounting students were the prototypical accounting students, right? And they were asking the questions, and one kid asked a question, and nobody was talking to me. I was a young guy, and these guys were Limited, and they were the king of the world, right? And the accounting students are like, "Do you think wingtips are a good investment? Should I spend $90 on wingtips?" And some of the big guys at Limited were going, "Well, if there's proper maintenance," and and so the kid looks at me and goes, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Dude, you haven't figured out how to work 12 hours a day yet. You're not going to care what your shoes are. You're going to be worried about falling asleep with a red dot and drool on your papers. Wingtips are not in your formula from here on out." So after that, they asked no questions of the Limited guys because, I'm much closer in age to them than these guys, right? So 2 days later, I got a call from the Limited guys. "Hey, we want you to come and visit us," right? So
twist of fate, right?
It was, man. It's one of those like forks in the road where I took the right fork.
Yeah.
So I go visit him, and this was back in the day, man. I mean, they were the king. They were big, right? They had the big thing out on the east side at Morse Road, the big black fort buildings and distribution centers, and honestly, for a young single guy back there, the hottest women in the world were there, and they were making big money. They were traveling. They dressed to the 11s, and it was just a really high energy environment. They overhired people that were way overqualified for the position, but they paid them a lot of money, and it was good, right? So I went there, made a couple visits, and they're like, "We'd like to make you an offer." And I'm like, "Well, I really love public accounting. I don't know if I want to do this." So
right.
I'll throw out some numbers. I think these are correct. Yeah, I was probably making $21,000 at Coopers and Linebrand, and they offered $45,000. So I was like, "Oh, okay."
That's one of those offers that comes in. You're like, "Yes, I accept."
Yeah.
I don't negotiate.
Well, actually, I went back to my personnel guy who sent me to the recruiting dinner at Coopers, right? Then Coopers and Linebrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? So, and I'm like, his name was Carl, and I'm like, "Carl," I'm like, "Look, man, I wasn't looking to leave, but they have made me an offer that is, I don't expect you to make me this much of an offer, but can you give me some more money and I'll stay?" And he goes, "Well, what did they offer?" And I told him, and he's like, "Enjoy your career."
Yeah.
So away I went, and condensing that down, it was really, I've been very lucky in public accounting and then at Limited because I had fantastic experience in all of those companies, right? All that seemed to prep me for running my own thing, right?
You told me you were kind of a problem solver for the company.
That's it, really. I mean, I was a guy that liked to get his thumbs in a lot of different pies, and maybe sometimes I solve problems, or maybe sometimes I cause problems. But so, but I got great experience on. One of the things was we had just built a new distribution center, and my boss was like, "Hey, go out there and figure out what's going on. We don't have any statistics, we don't have any KPIs, anything." So I went out there and I met these guys that are pretty legendary in the distribution world, and still are. A lot of them are, right? They're probably retired now, but they were big legends in that time. And I just learned a lot about how an apparel distribution center worked, right? And then after that, my boss says, "Hey, go up to the sweater department. There's they want to get rid of 7,000 green sweaters that they're not going to put in the store, right?" So I'm like, "Oh, what's this all about?" Right? So I go up there, and long story short, I ended up selling those to a little company called TJ Maxx, which was maybe 100 million in sales then, based out of Framingham, Mass. They're $58 billion entity now. They're the biggest. They went past limited a long time ago.
Wow.
Right? So that was the first sale I did. So I started selling this excess merchandise. Right. First it was the 7,000 sweaters, and then got into building a store returns program that made us, we were throwing this stuff in the dumpster, and ended up getting $3 a unit, shipping to 7 vendors that I had met throughout the United States. They had 7 regions at limited, and like 6 months made $10 million that we were throwing in the dumpster.
Nice.
Right. So that sort of introduced me to this world of off-price clothing, right? In hindsight, I realized I was really dumb, but at least I was trying, So at one point, the little light bulb went on over my head, the one that said, "Ding, hey, this is all in your head. You know all the contacts. If you just had some money, you could buy this stuff yourself and sell it." Entrepreneurial dream, right? So,
how old were you when that light bulb went off?
I was 29. Yeah.
So you said you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur, but you didn't go directly into that after school. Was there ever a consideration of that? Like, hey, I don't need to become an accountant. I'll just go start my own thing.
Well, I think, interestingly, when I went to Ohio State, my initial thought process along that entrepreneurial line was that I wanted to take what they then called CIS, Computer Information Science, right? And because I was like, this new thing called databasing seems really interesting,
Wow.
right? Like, databases could be the wave of the future, like collecting all this information.
Boy, were you wrong, huh?
Yeah, a real miss there,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So unfortunately, I took winter of '81. Ohio State was on quarters back then, right? Winter of '81, I took my first CIS major class, and I'm thinking, man, I'm excited, right? But it involved punch cards. You guys are all too young to remember this, I think. Punch cards, right?
At least know what they are.
You
yeah.
had to type, and I was a terrible typist, right? So that class ended with me being frustrated, throwing my punch cards off the roof of the building and switching to accounting, right? So my thought process on that, again, and there was an entrepreneurial vein the entire time. Like, what can I prep myself for, right? And so I switched into accounting, and my theory on that was like, look, if you're going to go live in France, you might want to learn how to speak French. And if you want to run your own business, you might want to learn the language of business, which I considered to be accounting, right? That was my theory anyway. Good for me. It all worked out in the right path, right? So, and then, getting it limited, it was great experience, but I knew I really wasn't like a corporate guy at that point, right? So there was a lot of politics when I look back. It was, and I was naive to it totally, right? So one of my bosses, who was my friend and still is my friend to this day, he came in once and he said, "Hey, let me give you a little advice. You should come in on Saturday." And I'm like, "Dude, I get all my work done by Friday midday. I'm single and I want to run around and have fun, right?" So, but I didn't get it, right? He's like, "Oh, you don't have to work. You just have to make
Show
the
your face.
show.
Yeah,
You know,
just show your face.
go lock yourself in your office and play cards. I don't care. Just make yourself show up, right?" So, but the realization was there that I really just either I was too naive or I just didn't quite get the corporate game, but maybe I didn't want to get the corporate game, right? So, but again, I was going down that path of going out and whatever the fates had in store for me, it somehow was pushing me down this path. And, that's one of my sons gets really mad at me when I say, just get on the path, man, it'll find you. And he's like, that's stupid advice, Dad, so.
Stupid or sage.
Yeah. So
There's
either way.
sometimes a fine razor.
Yeah, it
between the
is,
two.
man. Yeah. So, but it was pushing me down the path and that, the light bulb went on. And honestly, here's the funny thing. I knew I got fired from there, and I knew I was going to get fired. Right. And honestly, I can tell you it was a great day when I got fired, but, and what's really interesting is the guy who fired me was my friend.
Mhm.
He didn't want to fire me, but we both had a mutual boss, and he made him fire me. So we laugh about this today, but the truth is, if I were in charge, I would have fired me too in today's world, because I wasn't running with the team. I was on kind of a different team, right? And in a big company like that, you're either in the game or you're heading out to, off the bench, right? So, so that all pushed me to getting to that point. So then I came upon the problem that you mentioned, which is, I don't have money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get that? So first deal we ever did, 50,000 jeans.
That's a lot.
I talked my buddy who I had trained in another division of Limited. And I said, I'm like, Rick, I'm going to pay you $5 for these $50,000 jeans. And I'm going to pay you in 30 days.
Okay. $250,000.
$250K.
That's a lot of money today, let alone when this deal occurred, which was
1992.
Yeah. So that's
It was big.
Probably what, 3x that, something like that.
I go to Vegas and don't gamble, and people say, why don't you gamble? I'm like, because I gamble all the time. I don't need to go to Vegas to gamble, right? So, so anyway, I had these. What I didn't tell Rick is that I had these jeans pre-sold to a lady named Ann Ciccarelli, who was a buyer at Marshall's, for $6, and Ann was going to pay us in 15 days.
Nice.
Right. So 92 August, I go to the Limited. At that time, it was Lerner, which was where the jeans were. And I go there and load the truck myself.
Now, how long had you been off the job from the Limited?
2 months.
Okay. So not a long term.
Not a long track, but I never lost sight of what I was going to do. Yeah. Right. So I go there, it's 95 degrees, 95% humidity, right? I load the truck, 53-footer, top to bottom. Cubed it myself, ran it in a conveyor. The driver's watching me. We get in the truck. I'm like, dude, if they try and stop us at the gate, just crash on through because I got this now, right? So my partner, Mark, who, we can talk about having a great partner. I was very, very lucky to have a great partner, right? And but we used his house as a garage, right? But he was flying for American Airlines. He was a fighter pilot in the military, and he was flying out for American. He was in Chicago, and so we bring this 53-footer down the residential street and open up his garage door.
This driver's like, these guys are idiots.
The neighbor's like, what's going on? I'm like, we're moving in.
Yeah.
The next time we did it, we're moving out. Right?
Yeah, right.
So we unload the thing. It's like, Mark is calling me. He's like, well, how's it going? I'm like, well, the garage is full, dude. I'm going to have to move into your living room. Okay. So we move it in the living room. Then he calls back. I'm like, well, that's filled. We're going to go down the hallway. We may have to go into the bedroom, the spare room, kind of a thing.
Did he had a significant other, right?
No. Thank God, no.
Yeah.
At that time, right? So, so we did that, and then a week later, we shipped it out to Marshall's. The truck pulls up at the residential place, right? So, and God bless Ann Ciccarelli, wherever she is now, but she started this whole thing by giving us the $50,000 deal, right? So about 2 weeks after that, we did a second deal, 25,000 denim jeans from my old boss. The one who didn't like me.
5,000.
Denim jeans.
That's a
Or,
lot.
I'm sorry, denim jackets. 25,000 denim jackets, and I had them pre-sold making $2 a piece. So another 50K.
Now we're starting to
I'm
talk.
I'm thinking, this is so easy. I'll be done. I'm going to be done in
yeah, I'm
3
gonna
years.
retire in a
Yeah,
couple of
I'll
years.
be done. I'm going
Yeah.
to be done. So easy, right? And same thing. But my boss, he was not dumb. He's like, oh, dude. He goes, I'm not going to give you credit. You have to actually pay me for these things before I take it out. So we scrambled up. We had the money. We leveraged it, right? So it's turn. The third deal, we did the same thing. So, there was no looking back. There was no making a mistake at that point. You can't screw up one deal or you're toast, right? So, I think that was the age. And, my partner, he was already an intense guy just from being a fighter pilot and, tough guy. And so we were just tunnel visioned in on making this thing work. It was like failure was not an option. Boats had already been burned, right? So we just drove forward. So I'm sitting in his house one day. It's probably 4 months in, and I hear a knock on the door, and it's the city inspector, and he's like, "The neighbors are telling me that you're bringing semi trucks down the field, down the street here." And I'm like, "Sir, I'm really sorry, but that is true. But I have in my hand right now a warehouse lease that I signed today." Right. So I'm like, "We're done. We're not bringing any more trucks." He goes, "Well, I'm glad for your success, but don't bring any more trucks down the neighborhood." Right.
Yeah.
So I sit out on the front porch. I watch this guy drive away. He gets to the end of the street, turns right. About 15 seconds later, the last truck comes the other way and turns right.
Yeah.
And
I hope you got all your neighbors a Christmas gift.
we treated the neighbors well. Yeah, it was all good.
Well, they all
So
got jean jackets.
they got clothes, right?
Yeah.
So that got us started. That was the seed money, right?
Yeah,
In the wholesale world.
And I told you prior to getting on that I wrote about that story. So I have a book that's unpublished. It's called The $1,000 Business, that basically talks about how we started our businesses here, and all of which have been done with less than $1,000. So the kind of idea is that it is possible, and you don't need to go out and get your friends or family or banks or venture money to start your business. It's certainly possible. And I used that story that you told me because that was, you didn't even need $1,000. All you needed the gas money to go pick up, drop off. Yeah. And it's not to say it's easy. Like, let's not act like it's easy to do it. But my kind of point was, when you do that, you have to learn all those fundamental skills, because you need to take that business from $1,000 invested to $5,000 to like you 50,000, 100,000, 200, and you're learning all those fundamental skills along the way, so you don't get to skip any of those steps. You had the accounting knowledge, but like, let's say you didn't, and then the venture capitalist comes in and they give you $5 million. You're like, well, I don't know I don't even know how to like account for this.
Right.
You haven't learned any of those skills, and I say it all the time. Entrepreneurship is a skill. It's just like any other thing. You learn it over time. You can't just instantly say, I got it.
You're 100% right. And to be totally honest, I'm still learning it.
Yeah.
I really am.
Aren't we all?
We all are. If you've survived, you're a learning entity. If you have stopped learning, you're toast.
Right.
You're done. Right.
And one of the things that I say really often is that what got us to where we are now will not get us to where we're going in the future. Right. So the skills that are necessary to take your business from $1 to 10 million are like, you have to be a maniacal control freak that like, I want to manage everything. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to drag this thing forward. And then once you get to a certain point, like at 10 million, that is extremely unhelpful for you to get to 50 or 100 million, because you can't be a control freak. You can't manage everything. You have to, like you just said, learn how to delegate. And if you try to run your business like you used to run it, it's just not going to work.
I think
that's a hard reality to learn.
I think we're brothers from a separate mother, man. We're all we're preaching to the same choir, or we are the choir. I think it's like your point there is great. Like, and I always said that, like there's a certain skill set that gets you from zero to something. I love Peter Thiel wrote a book, 0 to 1, which I consider one of the greatest business books, right? Because it's like, how do you get from nothing? I laugh at, I guess I shouldn't say laugh, but I'm humored when, in the world of tech that we live in, right, where no one makes money.
Oh
And it's
gosh.
like, well, I'm getting market share. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I never had the luxury of getting market share, right? Like, I was listening, I follow some companies, and I heard the CEO of Uber about 6 months, maybe a year ago, say, I think we have to care less about getting market share and think about making money. And I'm like, I think his stock has tripled since that comment, right? So, but if you're an entrepreneur, and really in my mind, entrepreneur means the measurer of risk, right? You're measuring what's my risk that I can get. It's just like to some degree, it's like a game in Vegas, right? There are certain odds that the house has in favor, and maybe you get a run, right? And you also got to know when to change the run, right? And to your point, like if you're doing what you did a year ago, I mean, banks in the beginning would say, well, what's your 5-year plan, right? And I'm like, 5 years?
Stay in business?
I'm trying to stay in business for 5 months, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a whole conversation about how do you interact with banks, right? And like I was fortunate in my days of public accounting, because one of the things I did, I was on the Bank One, now Chase, right, based out of Columbus, is they were on a mad tear of acquiring banks, right? So one of the great experiences I got was I was on this sort of rapid deployment bank. So at Friday night, if Bank One said, oh, we bought so-and-so bank in Mentor, Ohio, Monday morning, I was in that bank in Mentor, Ohio. And what we did is we would just go through and assess all the loans, the loan review process, right? So that gave me like super good experience about how do you work with bankers? Like what are the things that bankers need to have to make it fun for them to give you money, right? Kind of a thing. So that was great knowledge to have and get insight on that. One of my favorite sayings is that I don't have any bank friends, but I have a lot of banker friends, right? Because you build the relationships with those people, and they'll help you to every extent that they can. You still got to make money, right? Unless you're going to go raise capital to get market share. But we never had that luxury, like you guys never had that luxury.
Never
right?
even considered it.
Yeah. A lot of times people say, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, maybe I was too dumb to know I couldn't do it.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I didn't talk myself out of it. Because here's us, kind of Midwestern dudes that are operating in a world that's largely centered in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami, right? And, I think we were maybe a little bit of a novelty to people, right? So
I still think we are, honestly. We're an e-commerce agency, and people are like, where are you? I'm like, we're in a town called Plain City. They're like, that sounds exciting. We just had a gentleman in here, awesome guy, really smart fella named John Sherwin. He went to Oxford and now lives in New York City, and he started his business and like instantly took funding. But he was like, well, there's a lot of things that come along with that. He spent time in Silicon Valley, so it's like completely different growth path. But he knows some things about taking outside money that I certainly don't, but he also understands like there's pitfalls to that. And he kind of, it's funny because he sort of looks at me with some amount of envy, where it's like, man, you bootstrap this thing. And I look at him with some amount of envy. I'm like, man, you raised like $15 million, So it's just
would have been
funny.
so easy.
Yeah, I know, right.
But it really wasn't meant to be that way for us, right? Like, I think that, like I was joking with you, like I'm going to write a book if this podcast goes well, right? So I think that, you don't have a choice. You just have to go on the path that you're on, right? So it's like, you get these things that happen, and you just don't look back, and you don't give yourself the out of saying, oh, it'd be easy if I got money, because you don't. You don't get money this way, right? You got to make your own money. So
and there's no free lunch. Like if you get that money, there's all these things that come along with it. So even if you do get that funding, well, now you have. I think John said he has 200 different people on his cap table. Like,
it's I've forayed into that recently. We can spend some time on that, and that world is populated with people who think a lot differently than we think, right? One of the big insights to me was that, by nature I'm debt averse, right? I don't want to have a lot of debt, right?
Yeah, agreed. Same as us.
I know you think the exact same way, right? So, but this is a group of people who use debt to make deals, right? The debt leverage, and I learned all kinds of fun new terms, equity roll, debt leverage, all
Yep.
that stuff. So these guys use money, right? And that's why you see they're so tied to the interest rate world, right? So in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years where we've had these low interest rates, these guys have been going crazy because you got free money,
Yeah.
right? Money at 8 or 9% changes everything, right? So
Yeah, you talk about companies that aren't turning a profit. And it was Warren Buffett who said, when the tide goes back out, you see who's swimming without their clothes on. So you
Yeah.
see all these companies that were not turning a profit that was able for them to get funding when those low rate environments were in existence. But now that the rates are up, you are not going to fund a non-profitable company. And, I feel fortunate because I've always said, if someone wants to buy my company, you know what they're going to be excited about? Profitability. Yeah, I mean, having sales are great, but like, if you're not making any money, like, I don't know what to do with that.
I just don't even have a concept of it being different than that, right? But I think that, like my book thing is, I think the premise of my book would be like, hey, if you've picked up this business book because you think you need to be Harvard educated and so on and so forth. I'm writing this from the perspective of a guy who got admitted to Ohio State because he was a resident of Ohio and he was breathing.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think their standards have probably increased a little bit, at least since
I
then.
couldn't get in today, which is fine. So, but that was, that's it. It's like that world of the Harvard guys and the Yale guys and the big mind, that world is out there. And there's a lot of that, right? That's just not the world that we've been populated. I know there was a couple local Columbus investor guys that are pretty well known, and you follow them in the business publications, and they're like, we're not just going to look for companies that are market share. We're going to look for companies that have sustained business and have profitability and have good, sound financial systems and have a good, diverse customer base. And I'm like raising my hand over here,
Yeah,
but
right.
but I'm like, but I'm in retail, so no one wants to do that,
Yeah.
right? So it's but I think that part of our thing is that we just never thought help was coming, right? It's not coming to help you.
No,
You-
absolutely.
and really, at the end of the day, I think that's more of America. Like not many people are going to be Elon or Bezos or Zuckerberg, right? That's a small collection. A lot of people are just going to, can I make enough money to have the freedom to do this lifestyle that I want? One of the great benefits for myself and my partner Mark is that, I would tell you that both of us are really good dads because we're able to, put down the pen, go to the elementary school, see the singing program, do this and that, because we can be our own boss. You still got to do the work. It doesn't go away, but you have the freedom to do that. And that's really an invaluable thing, so that's more of a life quality thing. And, I know a lot of guys who are still working the big corporate thing, right? And it takes a lot out of you and it takes a lot away from you, right? But I know my kids, and that's like one of the greatest unsung benefits of all of this, right? And my kids now think I'm a lot smarter than I was now because they're out in the real world, and they're like, "Hey, by the way, how'd you do that?" kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's all good,
Yeah, one of the things that I say to everybody all the time is, let's enjoy this time that we have at this company. Let's be in business to be happy. I can go be stressed out and work for somebody else, So I think that's a enormous benefit that we have here, that, if something's stressing you out, just like, you can get rid of it. You can't get rid of financial problems, but if you have a bad client or something like that, we just want to do happy, healthy business. So we get rid of that. So
I think in a lot of ways it's less stressful. Like, again, I had this kind of luck to work with a lot of big apparel companies and talk to a lot of guys and girls who are big executives. These are people that are making $300,000-$400,000 a year, but they're tied to that, right? And a lot of them have said to me, when we're alone, they'll say, "Hey, man, I really want to do what you're doing. I want to be my own boss. I want to make money like you're making and do it on my own." And I always had the same answer for them, and I've always gotten the same response too, which is like, "Oh, hey, if that's what you want to do, I guarantee you that you can do it. because I know you're smart. You're not doing this if you're not super smart, right? There's just one thing you got to do. You got to put your pen down on this desk right now, get up and walk out, and you'll have no choice but to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
And none of them have done that
Yeah.
yet. So, because that's kind of what it is. Like, that's a big trade-off. Do you want to go and make the big corporate money? And sometimes there's days where I'm like, oh man, I could just make the corporate money.
Yeah.
But really, it's just not who I am. So
Yeah, there's kind of this story where, you climb the mountain and you get kind of 2/3 of the way up and you can see the top, but you realize that the path that you took will not be allowing you to get there. So now you got to climb back all the way down to the base, then to climb back up. And I think that's kind of indicative of those folks, right? I made it. I'm doing the $300,000 a year job. But if I want to get to 800,000 or million or be my own boss, I got to climb all the way back down to this mountain and start again. And I think that scares a lot of people because it's not easy.
no, well, one thing I know about you, because you're like I've said, we're brothers from a different mother, is that you don't operate in a world of fear, and neither do I. Right? Is there fear? I like to say there's only two emotions: love and fear.
Yeah, I like that.
Right? And every single thing we do is driven by one of those two emotions, right? Now, fear is not always bad and love is not always good, right? But you can't be managed by fear, right? So, of course, if you took time to think about what you've done and what we've done, you could talk yourself out of it pretty quickly because, oh my God, that's got to be scary. What happens if you don't make this or we can't make payroll, right? So you got to kind of just dismiss fear. And, it can be healthy on occasion, but you just can't really operate that way. You got to live in a world without that kind of fear of failure, maybe. So,
yeah, I mean, how do you deal with that? You said you have 300 plus employees. And obviously, every other Friday, you got a payroll to make. I mean, does that stress you out? Because that's what I've heard from the business owners that have that enormous amount of it. Maybe you don't think it's enormous because, right, we know people with 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. But to me, that's just such a burden, such a responsibility. Everyone wants to be the business owner. They want to make the most money, right? Well, why is Jeff going to make all the... Well, I mean, he's got 300 people that are, counting on him every Friday to put that money into their account. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I think that what I really think about that is, I use an example from last year, right? Like last year I spent $4 million on store payroll. And I know that there's $400K in just absolute fat in that, and I'm like, I gotta go and attack that, right? So the concept on that, and we actually ended up saving more than that by recasting how we cover stores and everything, taking a hard look at that. But I think the way you get to balancing that is that you make sure you have people employed who are generating revenue to pay their own payroll, right? So you get that. You can't have someone who's an anchor and dragging it down, right? So, because they've got to create revenue or else all of us are done, right? So if you're focused on making sure that you don't overhire and that you have people who are doing things that are creating revenue or saving expenses, the other side of that coin, right? You maybe to some degree you put your head in the sand a little bit and count on the fact that your business is functioning correctly, right? The other thing as an entrepreneur, that I think we have done over the years, and if you charted this, it would be one big sine wave, is that it's really helpful if you can see where the downturn is and you can start making cuts where you might not, you don't want to be behind the curve on making cuts, right? You got to be in front of the curve because you don't have the luxury to keep carrying people that aren't really creating revenue for you. So, it's like we just want to be a little bit proactive and see the trend. Like I've been in a number of conversations on some, joint calls with people, and right now people are projecting some doom and gloom, right? It's not a good world right now. It's a bad mojo world. So like we're already thinking, okay, do we draw back store hours a little bit? Do we cut here, cut there? You got to make some painful cuts, but that's you could melt down if you just sit there and think about how to make payroll, right? But you also come to the conclusion that these people will live without you too. If you
Yeah.
have something,
Yeah.
they're smart people. They'll go and get something and do, hopefully what's good for themselves, they will. But, if you build that culture and the team, supporting the business and support your fellow employee, I think that helps a great deal. And, people are out there. One of my philosophies is if your job as the boss is to clearly define the expectation of your employees, of each individual employee. Because if you do that, I do believe that, 95% of them want to reach that. They want to say, yeah, I did what you expected. So of course you got to make sure the expectations are clear and that the expectations are the right expectations for them. Right. So, but no, that's what, that's the scariest thing of all is how do you make payroll? Right. But, I think also over a period of time, and my controller and I kind of laugh about this a little bit. It's like, that old adage, it's never quite as good as it seems, and it's never quite as bad as it seems, right? So don't get too excited when it's great, but don't get too down when it's bad. I think that that attitude will kind of keep the entrepreneurial mindset moving forward. And it's interesting because, we fired a lot of people. And what I tell people about that is most of the people that we fired wanted to be fired. They weren't happy.
Yeah,
or they would do a better job, right? So sometimes you're the guy, you're the bad guy, and you give them an excuse to go back to the spouse and say, that bastard fired me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. People will definitely do things, and you go, "Why are you doing this?" And then, yeah, you have to let them go, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And sort of to your point about not getting too high, not getting too low, I think that just our time being in business has just leveled me out from a stress perspective, because you have these bad things happen, and then 6 months later you're like, yeah, that was a bummer, but like we made it through, and yeah, that thing was great, but it really actually didn't fundamentally change our business that much. So I don't need to get too high on it. So if my car breaks down, it's like, okay, well, this is a bummer, but we've gotten through everything else that was way more serious than this, so we're probably going to get through this, and doesn't really help me that much to get stressed out and freak out.
Man, you're spot on that. I mean, like I can go back and list a long, $400,000 worth of goods held up in U.S. Customs for no apparent reason, right? When we were importing goods, and you can't call up 1-800-Customs, get on the ball, right? It's like, oh my God, how are we going to get through this? Now I look back on that, I'm like, oh, that was nothing. So you're right. You get through that, and it's the cycle. And, it's kind of reminds me, like, even with my parents, right? It's like there was a certain point when we were all aged up, and we were trying to shield our parents from anything that was kind of bad, oh, they're older parents. They can't, And then one day we all realized, we're like, come on, they raised 7 kids. I think they've seen it all. We're not going to scare them anymore. And that's kind of the same analogy, I think, for the business. You've just been through these ups and downs, right? And you're going to get through. And unless you're, unless you're lying to yourself about your business operation. And I tell my sons, you can't lie to the one guy in the mirror every morning if you're an entrepreneur, because you're toast. You can't lie. Part of also the definition of entrepreneur is quickly figure out your weaknesses, right? And address those weaknesses as quickly as you can, right? So, because they don't age well. If you're not doing something correct, you need to adjust, or you won't sustain.
Yeah, the market, doesn't have any liars out there. They can't last for a long time. The market is very ruthless. It's going to quickly find you out. Like, and if your strategy doesn't work, your concept doesn't work, there's no pats on the back for that. It just you're going to fail, and you're not going to be able to press forward.
Oh, that's very true. There's like the banks are. I always say, I do. People say, oh, you don't have a boss. You're your own boss. I'm like, no, I have bosses.
Yeah.
My customers are my boss. My bankers are my boss. There's a lot of people that are my boss, because I'm in this world that you're navigating through, right? So, but yeah, you manage all that stuff as you found out the same way I have, and I think it's just you got to do a lot of self-evaluation continuously, and beyond that, the business evaluation. Like one of the things is like, we've kind of opened our stores so far on this kind of gut feel. And a lot of them we were doing these like pop-up event sales that we do, and that we built a customer base and in that particular location. Then COVID comes along, and having 1,000 people gather in one spot is not really universally accepted, right? So now we haven't been able to do that as much. And so now I'm thinking, okay, look, all right, seat of your pants, great, good instincts, great, gut feel, get all that in. But the truth is there's data out there that can help you make better decisions on that. So I think it's time for us to really maybe get some outside help for site selection, because every other big retailer in the world has site selection people who help them do this, right? So, and there's enough databasing and demographics out there that you can take your best store and say, well, let's see what the data and demographics say, and then figure out where's the data and the demographics say about that store over there, right? So it's a self-evaluation and an evaluation of your business on a continuous basis.
I want to take a quick break, but I want to figure out how we go from a couple thousand jeans to 300 plus employees and dang near 20 locations.
Still got a lot of story to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Jeff. We've done 3 deals, but we're still pretty far away from 17 locations and 300 plus employees. So help me bridge the gap a little bit here.
Yeah. So the evolution of our wholesale business was it was interesting. Like so obviously the low hanging fruit in Columbus is Columbus, unknown to a lot of people, is a pretty good hotbed for apparel companies, right?
Yeah.
Outside of New York and LA, you got Limited, you got the Big Lots, you got American Eagle, you got lots of things to choose from. So that was the low hanging fruit, if you will, right? So we tried to establish as many relationships. We had the knowledge on how to help them, and from a business standpoint, our pitch to them was, look, we are your problem solvers, right? Like, these big companies are great as long as things are running down the conveyor belt and going out to their stores, but when something falls off the conveyor belt, they're not all that great at handling a mess, right? So, we've been buying the world's most famous sportswear and lingerie catalog goods for years. In fact, I joke that I buy the most of that than anyone in the world, which I do. I get a truckload a week.
There you go.
Of bras and panties and such. But anyway, so the low hanging fruit was there. But like any business, again, we talked about this earlier. You evaluate and say, okay, well, that relationships come and go. There's things go wrong. Where else can we evolve to? And the next logical step was, let's go to New York City. There's lots of apparel in New York City, right? So there we were, the Billikens from Ohio, and going to New York City. And so we get there, and honestly, it was like Disney World for adults. It was, you found all these vendors that had tons of goods, right? And the way they got goods is they would manufacture for the big name labels, but they would also manufacture what the industry calls backups, right? So let's say the buyer orders 100,000 of something, and they talk to the vendor and say, hey, be ready, I might want another 50.
So this buyer could be Nike, Adidas,
Carhartt,
anyone.
This sort of applies to every apparel company, right? So, because it's all fast fashion in a sense, like, you got to be ready. If something's hot, you want it to bring stuff right behind it, right? So a lot of these vendors had a lot of stuff, and a number of times the buyers would say, sorry, don't need it, but don't sell that 50,000 pieces of it, kind of a thing. But they did anyway. So we went to New York, and we sourced product, and then we eventually opened up a showroom in New York City.
Oh.
Yeah, we had a showroom for a number of years.
That was the first location?
That was the first sales location, I think, 1385 Broadway, in the Garment District.
Okay.
This was back in the day, and the Garment District is basically from 38th, 39th, 40th, from 42nd south going through probably 30th, right? Just north of that is Times Square, right? So, I would stay, usually I would go there and stay at the Marriott on Times Square, one of the Times Square hotels. And at that time in New York City, it wasn't necessarily safe to go outside in Times Square at night, right? So 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 we worked hard in New York, either sourcing product or selling product. We had vendors who would come, the TJ Maxxes and the Marshalls and the Rosses, Burlingtons. They would come to our showroom, and we would show and we would sell. That went on for a long time. During that time, we also started doing some warehouse sales for ourselves first, right? And that kind of took off, right? Because we were, we'd sell the knickknacks that we had left over, or we'd buy some assorted lots and say, hey, we'll sell this to the ladies and the public that show up, and we got pretty good at that. But we were like, man, this retail thing, this is hard work. I think wholesale's better, right? So we were gonna kind of take a different direction on that, and so we get a call from the world's most famous sportswear and lingerie catalog, and they're like, hey, we've been doing these cafe sales for our employees, and we hate it. It's a lot of work to set them up. It's a lot of work to run the sale, and it's a lot of work to take it down. But we hear you guys do a really good job. Would you consider doing this for us? So we thought about it for about a half a second, and we're like, yeah, sure. So we, they had this excess return inventory like any catalog operation would have. Buyers tend to buy a size 8 and a size 10 and see which one fits them better, and then liberal return policies, so they send back the size 8 because now the 10 works better. And so we would end up sometimes with that absolutely new return item, right? So but we did these sales for them, and honestly, I can't even tell you how much of a gangbuster thing it was. It was crazy, That's when I tell my story that I'm one of the few guys who's broken up a fight over a bra between two girls, right? So you put that down. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. That's my bra, kind of a thing. So we had a lot of fun with that. That turned out to be a really big thing. We did a lot of sales for them to start with. Then it was like, hey, we have a call center in Kettering, Ohio. Could you do this on the road? So we're like, we'll give that a try, right? So we go and we do it, and hey, pulled it off. It was great. And what girl doesn't love getting a fantastic deal? You can pay $50 for a bra, or you can pay $6. Which one do you want to do, right? So it was kind of like that mad, you've heard of the Filene's wedding dress mad rush that they have sometimes, and it was like that on steroids. And so that evolved into us eventually taking pretty much everything that they had, and we just started doing them for ourselves, right? They just wanted the problem solved. In between that, we also started a company we called QCT, or Quality Control Technology. So it was a good fancy name for a value add service, right? So again, beneficial that we're here in Columbus, Ohio. We have tons of retailers who have tons of issues. An issue would be the Chinese manufacturer or Hong Kong manufacturer has shipped 50,000 denim jeans. The quality control group here in Columbus has said, we checked the statistical measurement, and there's unacceptable variances on these belt loops. They're out of measurement, right? So what we would do is we would bring the 50,000 jeans in, and we would actually individually measure each one.
Interesting.
And we would say, 5,000 of the 50 are in fact out of tolerance, but 45,000 are good. So all parties were happy. The buying vendor got their 45,000 jeans. The selling manufacturer got 45,000 jeans in. But the real reason we did it is because usually we would end up buying the other 5,000.
Interesting.
And so we would make our piece rate, but we would also make a vig on the wholesale, right? And it was all blessed by the factories and such, right? And then we discovered, there was a lot of politics in that. I did a job once on 100,000 knit tops, right?
Okay.
And the problem identified to us was that there was a crease in the back of the top that wasn't acceptable.
Now, would they come to you and say, hey, we're starting to see some issues, or would they give it to you fresh off the boat, if you will, and say, hey, check these 100,000 units?
They would usually have it here in Columbus, right? And they've already done their check, and they call the factory. we reject this order.
I see.
And the factory falls on the floor at first, but then they get up and then they call us. Okay. So,
So sometimes it was the factory
Right.
actually, asking
Right.
for sort of a second opinion.
yeah,
if you
can
will.
we have
I
someone else
see.
review this, right? Maybe there were some tolerances that were out, but not everything, right? So this became a little closet business for us, right? So, but the example I was telling you was, one time I learned a lot about corporate politics on this one too. So, these manufacturers in Hong Kong are just doing huge business, right? It's massive.
Worldwide.
100,000 units of a single item, not that big of a deal, right? So I get the tops in and we're looking at them and I'm like, man, I don't see any crease anywhere here. So I call up the buyer and I'm like, hey, can you come out and show us exactly what you're looking for? So she comes out and she's like, yeah, it's right there. Don't you see it? And I'm like, no, I don't see it. She goes, let me explain it to you this way. It's there because I'm not taking these goods from this vendor.
Oh.
There are bigger issues involved, right?
Oh, so it's like a beef that they
there's
had.
there's 25 orders that these people are dealing with, 100,000 each, right? And I don't know, there could be a number of reasons, right or wrong, but long story short, like I call up the factory and I'm like, look, they're not going to take these. So don't pay me 65 cents a unit to go through these. No, we want you to do it anyway. Okay. So we do it and then they reject them and we bought all 100,000 kind of a thing. Right.
Geez.
So we did that. And that was an interesting thing. That was back in mid 90s to early mid 2000s. Right. Like, and we, it was we made money on it, but we also got the product sourcing, right? And we developed relationships with factories and continued to do that, right? So once we had conquered New York, we decided, okay, what's the next? Because then the retailers got smart. They were, I don't want to cancel it when it's here. I'm going to cancel it while it's in the factory in Hong Kong.
Oh,
So then our next evolution for wholesale was, let's go to Hong Kong.
really?
So there was a stretch there where we traveled the world.
Heck
Yeah. I've been everywhere, and I like to tell the fun story. I was in Sri Lanka, which is the little island at the bottom of India.
I could
Formerly-
not tell you one thing about Sri Lanka.
Well, formerly known as Ceylon, and the home of Ceylon tea, big tea growers,
there
right?
you
Right.
go.
So an impoverished land, but an adventurous land nonetheless. There was a revolution going on while I was there once, but I literally went into a factory and there was like a 20-foot tall mountain of panties, right? And we're like, oh. So we ended up buying those, but so we learned all kinds of things like tariffs and quota, and how, let's just say loosely, a lot of organizations on both sides of the pond changed the rules and things like that. So you had to be kind of quick on that whole overseas buying, So anyway, the wholesale revolution continued on for a while. We did well at that, but our pop-up and event sales, as we called them, we were doing that on a bigger scale. And really what that did is it did two things for us. It prepared us to be a retailer. And it also prepared us, and we were well skilled at this before it was a code word, a buzzword, at reverse logistics.
Interesting.
So the modern term for reverse logistics right now is, with the advent of the massive e-com uprise, right? As you guys know, a lot of returns. In fact, I hold that not many companies that are only online businesses are making any money because they're not properly accounting for returns, right? So, we started, we were able to, further down the road, we were able to buy trailers and things from Amazon, Walmart, Target, Costco. And we were great from our previous experience at taking a mess and sorting it up in a reverse logistics way to get it to go through our retail channel, right? So all of these things were flying around, and we were doing it. And then another like big fork in the road was, and probably kind of where you and I finally maybe heard about each other was, I think in about 1998, I told my partner, I'm like, hey, all this assorted stuff we're getting, there's a new platform that I think we can sell this on. It's called eBay,
Yeah.
which was new, right?
Yeah.
Hard to imagine for other people that this was new once, but it was. And so we started selling on eBay. And this is probably similar to things you guys have experienced, but it was like the commercial where the meter starts ticking, right? And then the meter just starts flying, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, right? Hey, we can sell this stuff, but we realized there was only two problems: the beginning and the end, right? So how do you warehouse it on the front end? How do you pick it?
So you
on the back end?
probably didn't have like a big warehouse operation at this point in time. Were you like moving a lot of things directly, or how was the logistics going?
We still had our 50,000 square feet here in Plain City, and then on the west side of Columbus before Plain City. But so we, as hard as it is to believe for people who are younger than us, there was a day when there was no e-commerce, right? I know it's hard to believe, but it's true, right? So, and I like to call that time period the Jurassic period of e-com. Right?
If people would believe it, folks used to do mail order business. You would mail in your order, and you'd have to put your check in there, and they would mail you your product.
Cabela's was a mail order catalog, So, yeah, there's this new business, this online monstrosity known as eBay, right? So, we were really inventing the literal wheel of this, right? As we progressed in 2003, we were eBay's Entrepreneur of the Year.
That's amazing.
It was pretty incredible. I mean, we were doing, $500,000-$600,000 a month on eBay, shipping 1,000 packages. We pioneered the FedEx Smart Post, where, it went to the post office or FedEx consolidated and delivered to the post office for that last mile delivery. That was a new thing at one point, right? So, and I made plenty of call where I'd call, Joe, the postmaster in small town Idaho, and say, hey, Joe, did FedEx deliver you a pallet last Tuesday? Yeah. What am I supposed to do with that? I'm like, well, Joe, if you open that up, you're going to find that there's a lot of small packages for everyone on your postal routes there. Could you get those to them? Because they're wondering where they are right now, right?
Yeah.
So we did that. You may remember this. There were a ton of venture firms that came up and got venture capital who were providing software platforms to do massive numbers on eBay. Because, eBay was Ma and Pa working out of the garage selling the Pez dispenser, right? So, except that it wasn't pretty quickly. So in 2003, we were called to the very first eBay Power Seller Summit. Because and Meg Whitman was the head of eBay then, right? And eBay at that time was like the most powerful e-com presence in the world, hands down, right? To even get on the phone live with somebody at eBay was incredible. And there we went to the Power Seller Summit. We were the apparel rep. And when we started selling apparel, there was not an apparel category on the left side of eBay, right? So we go to the Power Seller Summit. And, we were apparel. There was a CD guy. There was a golf guy. There was a restaurant supply guy. There was a book guy, kind of a thing. And there's about like 20 of us, and there's the top 10 people of eBay. Meg Whitman right there, So she says, we have just really figured out that you guys are doing an incredible amount of business here, and we just want to know what we can do to help you. And we almost all in unison say, lower our fees. And Meg, not to give her full credit, she said, well, what else can we do? Because they were not going to lower fees. Yeah. So then we all of a sudden we had this monstrosity e-commerce business on our hand, right? And
almost out of nowhere.
It just literally, again, here comes the gypsy in us all, right? We found a new thing and we're running with it. And it was, we were literally inventing it as we were going, so then, and here's the great part for us, there really wasn't competition. like for instance, point of reference, that famous catalog, whose name I can't really say, but they did not at that time have an e-commerce site. So imagine their surprise when they got one and they found that there was already 100,000 pieces out there of their goods. So
they've been behind on it for a while because we sold some stuff of theirs 5, 6, 7 years ago that wasn't listed on Amazon.
Yeah, they've never been that really, they pushed their own website, right? So
For anyone who's listening, the entity we're talking about is a secret, right?
It is. Shh.
Yeah.
That's one thing about our business, which is interesting. We by default, we kind of need to be stealth because we don't really want to pump up that hey, we're capitalizing on giant retailer mistakes.
These
right?
these companies can't essentially get rid of the product, if you will, or this is sort of the best way for them to get rid of the product and move it off their books.
Well, one of our best pitches when we go to new customers is that, hey, all of our stores are in Ohio. And if you've never heard of Ohio, that's the black area that you fly over from New York to Los Angeles. Yeah. About a third of your flight, if you look down, that's Ohio. It's just black. Don't bother looking down, But so that's really a plus for us, right? We can make things just sort of disappear. Like a lot of times I go in and say, hey, do you know that we buy all of the goods from such and such world famous brands? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, okay, I rest my case. Perfect. You don't know, right? So that's appealing. One of the good things about the Midwest is appealing to some of those. So we pushed that. Some interesting points, like 20% of my business right away was international, right? Mideast, the Asian countries. I was selling a ton into Russia. I think Moscow made a customs rule that you could only ship $150 worth of stuff because of us. Because we were, when the international buyers would buy from us, they would buy like 1,000 pieces. And, because there was no customs clearance on it back then. They had not figured that out.
Interesting.
Right? So from a point of reference, like, for years, we never had any credit card fraud on international sales, which is unheard of now.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like it got to the point later where I'm like, hey, if I don't know you as an international customer, I'm holding this shipment for 2 weeks to make sure you didn't steal that credit card.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it was really interesting. It was finger on the pulse of what was good. I found it to be sometimes counterintuitive about what would sell versus what wouldn't sell. Like I called it the fishing lure rule. They liked shiny things that sparkled, right? And sometimes you'd think, oh, this is going to sell, and it would not sell. And then some things you're like, there's no way this is going to sell. Like I clearly remember this moment where I was holding a pair of high heels in my hand, right? And I'm like, what woman would buy a pair of high heels online? Isn't it a rule that you have to go in and try things on, right? We sold every shoe we ever put on there. It was unbelievable, right? So the concept of, how the world was functioning and selling apparel, at least, was changing pretty dramatically. It was for lots of other industries. So we ran that for a long time. There was a lot of pressure on our vendors because going back to that stealth mode, like they didn't really, we weren't competing with them when we were selling it in Ohio, but when we were online, our territory was the earth.
You're right. I was going to ask because it seems like the natural place where this story would go is you continue to grow as an e-commerce vendor, and then you're one of the biggest eBay or Amazon or websites, throughout the aughts.
Sometimes I say to myself, you really missed the boat on that one. You screwed that one up. It's like, because could that have been? I'll give you one more sidebar on that with a little then unknown company called Amazon.
Yeah. Well,
okay. So
heard about them.
You've heard about them, right? So, there I am. I'm kicking it on eBay, and I was using this third-party platform, Channel Advisor.
Wow, what year was this?
Oh gosh, man, a long time ago.
I didn't even know Channel Advisor went back that far.
They did. Well, they weren't big, but they acquired like a number of companies that we were with. So eventually, we ended up on Channel Advisor, right? So and those were all companies that had raised, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of venture capital to do this mass platform sell on eBay, right? So my guy says, "Hey, I can get you on Amazon. I've got a guy in Seattle." I'm like, "Amazon? Why do I want to mess with that?" Right? So anyway, I'm like, "Okay, we'll give it a try." So we start selling the same stuff, and I was probably getting 25% of retail on eBay, and my guys were like, "So what do you want to price it at?" I'm like, "Well, let's just go for broke, 50%."
Mm-hmm.
So I put it on Amazon, and it really started selling at 50%. I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah.
now we're talking." So, but we kept getting this strange message on the software: "You haven't shipped this order." And I'm like, "No, actually, we shipped it 12 hours after we got it, and I already have feedback." So I call up my guy at Channel Advisor, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm getting this weird thing. We've shipped this. As you know, we're very quick shippers." And he goes, "Yeah. That's not going to be a problem. I'll call up these guys and get it fixed." Right. So we go another month, and then my person comes in and says, "We've been kicked off of Amazon."
Hmm.
And I look back at that moment. I kind of didn't even care that much then, but to answer your question, why didn't I turn into a behemoth of online sales? That might have been the moment where I screwed up, right? So, but no, they got us kicked off because their interface did not work correctly.
Funny because we had that literal problem like a month ago with, I think it was with Walmart.com.
Yeah.
But some things never change, right?
No, man, the same things keep happening over and over. But so that kind of thing, and then sorry,
You're good.
that kind of thing. Sorry. We started that issue. Everybody was jumping in on eBay, competition. A lot of my vendors were like, we don't love you being on there. Right. So that's when we had a retail store in our warehouse, kind of just to get rid of stuff. And that margin was going like this and up. And my margin on eBay, people started saying things like, "I want free shipping."
Oh gosh.
And I'm like, well, I haven't been able to talk FedEx into giving me free shipping.
Yeah, I love that.
So, and they're like, "Hey, we want that thing called customer service."
Gosh.
And we're like, I don't know if we know how to do that, because that really wasn't a thing so much. eBay was a very seller-centric platform. The flip side of that, Amazon, then the fly on the behind was the opposite. And let's face it, they won, right? So anyway, again, that path changes, and the next day I wake up and I am into retail, right? So, and I'm thinking, this will be easy, right? So the last 12 years have been learning how to be retailers, right? We built our own POS. We built our own warehouse management. We built our own allocation and planning modules. Not perfectly, but we evolve on those. That goes back to being the learning entity all the time. Trying to, where do you put the right thing in the right place at the right time? And retail is sort of the crux of that whole thing, right? So, and then there's how do you run a staff? And the old adage, the hardest store to manage is the furthest one away.
Oh, interesting.
Right, because when it was in our warehouse, my partner and I could go solve every problem right there.
Right.
But when it's in Toledo, you can't, right? So then you start saying, that's when you get into the people component, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to hire people that are going to really represent, right? They're the face of our business there. And so that's the evolution of how we are retailers now. We still do wholesale. I don't do online business. I got out of that completely. I am dabbling in live streaming.
Interesting.
Yeah. Right now, I've hooked up with a couple people that,
like QVC style.
It's kind of a QVC style, but it's real live on time. You here it is. You buy it, and it's fast,
Interesting.
right? So, we started off with some people and we did like $5,000 in an hour.
Hmm.
So I'd say that's evolving. There's a couple apps out there. There's an app we're looking at now called Whatnot.
Okay.
That still trying to figure it out. I'm not looking at it to be a frontline. I'm kind of looking at it as, can I get rid of stuff that I ran out of time in season, or things that aren't really big sellers that I can pull out and get rid of in another way, right? So, retail, the business that we're in is, the answer is usually D, all of the above. There's got to be some aspect and multiple channels to get through things, right? So, so that's how we kind of made that 30-year arc leap to get to be retailers, right? We still do wholesale, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say you were a wholesaler. You were a pop-up shopper, you were an online seller, and then you became a retail guy. So it's just kind of a crazy arc, but always sounds like being able to find those good buys and then knowing that there are people out there who want those goods. So how do we get that product into their hands?
That's really the core of it. The off-price business is a very opportunistic buying business, right? You gotta kind of beat the bushes. You got to build relationships. Things come your way. One of the things we like to say is a really important thing is knowing what not to buy.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you can buy the wrong thing, but it's you.
I'm sure you have some good stories about the wrong thing.
Well, we've been lucky. There's always some wrong things. Like any good retailer will tell you that they encourage their buyers and their producers to be experimental, and guess what? Not everything works, right? So, but that's where you find the one thing that kills, and then you're there, right? So that's kind of the nature of the beast, right? But in the off-price business, again, going back to that entrepreneurial measurement of risk, is you got a downside. So if something isn't selling, you got a $3 liquidator, a $2 liquidator, and a $1 liquidator.
Oh, really?
Yeah, kind of a thing like that,
Oh, gosh,
right?
interesting.
So it's again, D, all of the above. You use your channels to move stuff through the channels and live to play another day kind of thing.
Do you remember any deals that were just like absolute like home runs, like legendary deals that you did that you went, man, I can't believe that one went so well?
There's been a good number of those, right? So I think you kind of know what a hot label is, like... Again, I don't want to say too many labels, but
the brand at the right time kind of thing.
Yeah. Again, interestingly, mid-COVID, post-COVID, I started getting calls from vendors that I thought I would never even be able to get in the door from. One vendor, I would tell you, Vineyard Vines, right? Like we always wanted to get some of their goods, and so they called us, because a lot of these stores were left with literally a season of goods in their store that they could not even open their doors to sell.
Right.
Right. So,
especially if that brand was a retail focused brand. So they're not banking on selling the stuff online. They're banking on people walking in and buying it.
That, and they're not going to say, we'll just hold these goods until next spring, right? Kind of a thing. That doesn't work that way with these guys.
You're in our fashion sense is maybe not quite what the in-seasoners is.
Yeah. So, hey, we hear you guys can solve a problem. And so, we run down the line. I gave them offers, and, you try to, the reality is if I'm buying from them, they're not going to make money. It's a question of how much are they going to lose, right? But the operative theory for that is really kind of simple, which is the only reason to sell anything off is that you're going to replace it with high margin goods. That's it, right? And it's better to take the hit now, because if it does not age like fine wine. Right. It is not, if I offered you $5 now, it's not going to $7 in 6 months. It's going to $3 in 6 months. Right. So they looked at it, and they're an example. They're a great company, I'm sure, but they decided they didn't want to do it, So fast forward a couple of years, and now I'm buying it from someone else, and it's for less money than I offered them. So, it kind of comes and goes with how the business flows, and there's a lot of variables, inventory levels. You may have heard in the recent past, Target had a massive massive amount. A lot of retailers had a lot of inventory because they were really, riding high on the online COVID wave,
Mm-hmm.
and they all overbought.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, they all overbought. Sorry,
You're good.
and they all got caught in the international supply chain.
Oh, yep.
So interestingly, in our little world, being only in Ohio, when COVID opened up, we were like, "Ooh, we're stuffed with goods. It's perfect."
Mm.
But if you were a big retailer operating in 40 out of 50 states that were all opening up at different times, and you had an international supply chain, your supply chain was sitting off the coast of Long Island
Right.
in any number of ships that were not allowed to port
Mm-hmm.
because one of their crew had COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that just, when they opened back up, like I say, at TJ's or a Ross, they probably had 50% of the inventory in their stores they wanted. And that, that was detrimental, because what we found was that our customers, when Ohio opened up, they literally knocked the doors down to get in, because shopping is a therapeutical.
Yeah.
It's shopping therapy, right?
Mm.
And the urge to get out, and we have, our average store is about 15,000 square feet, so we could make a good show of cleaning. You weren't like shoulder to shoulder in a mall. And our customers came in with a vengeance, and they were ready to shop. We were ready to sell. So, yeah, we had some great years coming out of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Basically for that reason, in our little world, right? I mean, I think a lot of the supply chain is now solved. The issues with the supply chain are solved, and a lot of the companies are moving forward. And, I think everyone's cautious right now in terms of, they don't want to repeat the same issue they had with COVID, where they overordered and then got underdelivered, and then they ended up with giant bubbles, a la Target. So,
yeah, and I was just kind of asking you what your read on the economy is before this, and you were kind of saying that your business is sort of an interesting one because you are in the discount good world. So at some capacity, it helps when the economy downturns, but it seems like you have sort of an advanced system that kind of gives you indicators of how the world's going.
well, interestingly, we have been down this year a little bit, not as much as other retailers, I think, because of that resiliency. But it's still, what we're seeing is there's a couple of retail measurements, average unit retail, AUR, right? So our AUR is up, meaning we're charging a little bit more. We're not marking down as much,
Yep.
right? Our average dollar sale, our ADS, is good. It's staying at the levels that it's been, or it's increasing a little bit, because when they come out to shop, they're going to make an effort to shop and get what they need, right? My foot traffic is down, and we're hearing that from tons of other retailers. It's just people are cautious. I think one of the leading indicators that floats around the retail world is, what's credit card debt right now.
Yeah, I saw
And
that it's like record levels right now
it's
for Americans.
Yeah, it's like $1 trillion something, right? Credit card debt. So you got that. You've got gas prices. You've got food prices. You've got the general scourge and fear of inflation,
Mm-hmm.
and the bad mojo in the economy. And I think people are cautious right now. They're not going to overspend. They still have to spend or want to spend something. So, as an entrepreneur, business owner, this as well as I do, you batten down the hatches a little bit and ride out the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And, make sure you're not making mistakes and shooting yourself in the foot, right? Like we've done some things to add to our planning and allocation practices, and, we're pushing the better things at the better times and getting goods out in the store when it's the right time to get them in there. And that's really kind of the science to the whole thing too. Really retail is just a big giant math problem, is what they say, right? It's like, how do you distribute? And so we're just making sure we're doing, all the things right that we can, or conversely, not doing too many wrong things, and then live to play another day.
Yeah, and if you make it out to the other side when times get tough, then you're one of the few survivors, and you get to kind of keep the game going, but now with a increased market share.
Yeah, I think that that lesson was, really highlighted coming out of COVID. If you survive that, you're kind of badass,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So,
Well, we
you
took
know,
the benefit of people, transitioning to online sales. We had certain food brands that people were legitimately stocking up on. We had a rice brand at that point in time. People were just stocking up on rice, just irrational consumer behavior. But hey, we'll get the product to your door if you want it.
no, you guys were definitely in the right sector for that, and it had to be great for you guys. Congratulations on that. I know that I had enough toilet paper and paper towels from Costco to build a couch in my house.
You were the one who was stocking up on those. Well, Jeff, you've been in business for a really long time. We have a lot of listeners out here who maybe want to be entrepreneurs or maybe first-time entrepreneurs, or maybe they're somewhere along their entrepreneurial journey. I'm sure you've learned 1,000 lessons, but maybe help me distill some of them down. For someone listening who's thinking about being a business owner or as a business owner, what do you feel like are some of the core lessons that you've learned that are going to help you kind of take that business and make it 20, 25, 30 years in?
Yeah, obviously that's the $1 million question, right? So, I kind of try to boil that down to simplistic terms, right? So for me, it's kind of and I hope no one laughs at this, but it falls back on accounting, right? So let's go down the balance sheet, right? So what's the first thing on the balance sheet? It's cash,
Yeah.
right? So what do I say? What's the number one rule? Guard the cash.
Cash is king.
Guard your cash. Okay. 1A, cash doesn't always look like cash. Sometimes cash looks like the next thing on the balance sheet, receivables. So you got to collect your money, right? Sometimes cash looks like the next thing, inventory.
Yep, that pesky inventory.
Are you managing your inventory?
You and I both know
Is
that
it old?
inventory.
Are you tight on your inventory? Are you buying too much inventory, right? You might need the next line on the balance sheet, fixed assets. You might need a new building, Alex. So now you've got fixed assets. Did you get the best interest rate? Did you get the best bang for your buck, your square foot building? Then you've got payables, right? So you get down to payables and, how do you manage your payables? Again, that's cash, but it doesn't look like cash, right? I like to go out in my warehouse and pick up a dress and ask some of my new workers, I'm like, what do you see on this hanger? A dress? No, I see $12, right? You see a dress, I see $12, right? So that's the way you think about inventory, right? So it's really, kind of, not really joking about the balance sheet, but it's like, it's a very detail oriented game that you're about to get into, right? And and the old adage is retail is detail, right? So, you're going to have to do those kind of fundamental things right. Don't burn your cash. Make sure you collect receivables. Don't waste money. Don't buy the wrong inventory. Then you get into the more nuanced goods, because if you're somewhat successful doing that, then you're going to do what we've spent a lot of time talking about. You're going to hire people, right? So when you hire people, you'll be shocked, as we've discussed, to find out they don't work like you work. Right. So how do you manage that? How many people do you need to hire? Right. You got to look at all those things. It's a lot of common sense, but it's a grind. Right. That's why I'm really appreciative of my partner, because, on my notes, you see there, the yin and the yang. Right. So sometimes I had a bad day. He doesn't have a bad day, right? Sometimes I might need a break and go on vacation. He needs it another time, right? So you got somebody to help. I mean, a lot of people who are doing this small business kind of low level simplistic thing. It's spouses, family members, right? You can certainly learn a lot of lessons by hiring family members.
Oh, we got a couple of those. I'm sure with 300 plus employees, you got a couple of those.
Oh, it's so funny, man. I'll give you this funny story. I hired my mother, right? And my mother was so proud. She's like, because she'd been a housewife, right? And she was so proud she was holding her first time card, right? So end of the year, we like to give some bonuses, right? And so I gave my mother a tiny bit less because I didn't want people to think I was overly favoring my mother, right? Okay, probably gave out 50 bonuses. One person sent me a thank you card for the bonus. Who do you think it was?
Mom's.
It was Mom.
Yeah.
So I was immediately like, darn it, I should have gave Mom more, right? Kind of a thing. So So that was one that turned out well. My mom retired shortly thereafter. She had her fun and all that, but getting family members involved can be pluses and minuses. And just you got to be very alert at all times of what's going on. And then if you get a lot of customers, then you have to do that really difficult thing called customer service, and people have high expectations, right? And I say failure is really easy. Success is extremely hard, right? You got to really build on success, right? Because it's hard to sustain. The sustain is everything, right? Like I went to this seminar about, just this week, I went to a seminar about people selling their businesses and things, right? And there was a couple of people on the panel who really had bought a lot of businesses. And the biggest comment they had was that the people I'm dealing with right now trying to sell are really tired, right?
They
Tired.
kind of are on the down slope of the arc.
It's been it's the age thing, but it's also, the time spent in the business, but it's also the fact that this has been, a 3-4 year period that's going to be studied in business schools for generations to come. Like, what the heck was going on there? What happened? It disrupted and changed everything. And, I think it took a huge toll on people. It was really difficult, and it's, but again, as we've said, if you survived it, you can sustain. You'll get through a lot, and that goes back to the whole thing about, do you operate under fear or not? It's like, if you made it through this, you can do it.
Yeah.
But it's hard to make yourself believe every day. You get tired, life gets in the way. If you're blessed to not have family issues, health issues, anything like that, I still say the same thing to those people that you're referencing. I'm like, hey, you know what? You can do it. You can do it. You're smart enough to do it. And there's going to be bumps and challenges. You got to be an optimist. Sometimes you got to be overly optimistic. But it's risk, but there's massive reward on the other side too. And it's a pretty fulfilling thing to know that you can sustain it yourself. So anybody who asks me, I never say don't do it. It's like, if you are a thinker and a planner and you're a learner, you got to be a learning entity, like I mentioned before. You can do it.
I've heard it said that the optimists get to win and the pessimists get to be right.
Yeah. Pessimists can be right 1 out of 10 times, right? So, and then they're right.
Well, yeah, right. But the person who's the optimist be like, okay, hey, well, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to do it. And even if you're right that the odds are stacked against me, the odds were stacked against you that you were going to build a 300-person company. But it's like, okay, well, then sure, you probably would be right most of the time when you say that that's not going to work. But hey, I'm the person who went out and did it. I was the optimist, and I'm the one who gets to win at the end of the day. You
can always go get a job.
That's right.
And every job that I've ever been or seen people have, the job never hugs them back, right? So as they say,
except our companies, obviously,
we try to hug them, right?
So kind of my last question. You've been in business for a couple of decades now. I had an individual on the podcast named Rob Smith. He was awesome. He owned and operated a waste management company and exited that for, I think, like a seven-figure plus exit, maybe even an 8-figure exit. And he was like, we have a do not compete for another 18 months, and then we're going to go again. And he's maybe 60, 65, somewhere in that age bracket. And I was like, Rob, do you ever just ask yourself, like, why? Like, why am I going again? And he goes, my wife asked me that same question. And he said, I think we just feel like we still have more to give, and we feel like we have something to give to our people, that when we bring those people on, we want to help them make their lives better. So my question is, what keeps you going, a couple of decades into business, to say, like, we need to keep pushing this thing? You say you're going from 15 to 17 stores. You want to go from 17 to you want to go to multiple states, and then maybe nationwide. Maybe you want to go to 100 stores. What keeps you kind of going forward as you continue to have success? Because it's very easy to say, I've had success, like I can take my foot off the pedal a little bit now.
Yeah, man, you saved the best for last on this question, and I've got two perspectives on that, and you hit on it already. At some point, and maybe again it's an age thing. I'm 64 also, right? So it's like you're not doing it for yourself.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I don't really have to work, but I'm do it because, you know, you see the impact that you can have and you help people's lives. And there's a lot to that, right? Um, the other aspect of that is, and this is a kind of a funny story, but you know, I think when any of us, and you guys are young, so you're not there yet, but when you're 62, 63, 64, you start saying that to yourself, like, man, everyone else is retiring. You know, my neighbors are retired and their lawns look so much better than mine, you know, so
right.
because that's what they're doing. But so recently I met two gentlemen who are both 95 years old,
Whoa.
right? And these guys are still kicking it and they're still doing good stuff, right? One guy was a massive real estate developer. He built Polaris Mall. He built Tuttle Mall. He's built malls all over. He's, you know, I won't say his name, but just an incredible human being to have done what he done. And interestingly, I bonded with him a little bit because his wife is from my hometown, Mansfield.
There you go.
Right. So, and he told me, you know, years ago, I built the first discount store in all places in Mansfield,
Look at that.
Ohio. Yeah. And I remember the store as a kid.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but here's these guys, you know, and I felt like, man, I'm kind of a sissy thinking I should just quit at 64 or 65, right? You know, and because, and I've seen, you know, at this age, you know, you've seen people retire, and, you know, retiring is hard in the sense of, you lose a lot of your social interaction, you know, and it's
True.
like, I mean, I'm still energetic and my partner is energetic and we come to work and, you know, we push it and it's hard. And, you know, I mean, I think you can only play so much golf, and then you start, if it's your nature, right? It's your nature to do what you do or you wouldn't be doing it. And so you can, maybe if you've got a health issue or something like that, but man, if you're still kicking it, it's going to be hard not to do it because it's who you are.
Yeah, I've heard it said that if you're so aggressive and assertive that you're able to work through your career and save up enough money to retire, you're probably the type of person who's so aggressive and assertive that you're not going to want to just sit around on a beach chair and drink margaritas, you know, because it's like, that's fun for a couple of weeks. And then it's like, then what, you know?
Yeah, it's really, the other aspect is the social aspect. You know, I dialogue with a lot of people every day.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes my wife gets mad when I go home and I'm like, hey, I'm tired of dialoguing.
Oh, that's how I am. I go home and I don't really want to talk to anybody sometimes.
Yeah.
And I don't have 300 people in my ear, you know,
Yeah,
I've only got a couple of dozen.
That doesn't go over well. When I first started doing this, I remember thinking to myself, you know, my day is in 1 to 2 minute increments. I have 1 to 2 minutes to put out this fire and then another 1 to 2 minutes to put out the next fire, right? So that works as an entrepreneur. It does not work when you go home with your wife, right? So you're like, no, she wants more than that 1 minute, right? So you don't get that 1 to 2 minute burst and then you can be quiet. It doesn't work that way, right? So that's another entrepreneurial thing, you know, especially like if you're couples doing an entrepreneur thing, right? It's like, and both my partner and I both promised each other that we would never hire our respective wives, which was a very good move on for them, probably, right? So, but it's like, yeah, it's you know, you gotta, you're on and off, you click on, you click off, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, if you are your own business owner, entrepreneur, and you know this as well as I do, it's kind of a 24/7 thing, right? Mm-hmm. So
I was going to ask, do you have any methods that you kind of can turn on and turn off? Because I am personally of the opinion that I do much better work when I'm not trying to work for like 17 hours a day. I know there are some people who do that. And again, me personally, I feel like I can't do my best work when I'm trying to do that. So what about your strategy for, you got 400 people almost, like it's a lot.
It's the good thing for me is that, you know, I don't have to be at every store. I don't need to be in 17 stores at once, right? If you get, that's where your hiring comes in. You know, you get people to do it. And one of my philosophies is try to orchestrate myself out of a job, right? Because the other thing you get when you're an entrepreneur and you're somewhat successful is a lot of people bring you new ideas and they look great, right? They look great. And
you think you're so smart. Well, I did this business. I can do the next one. I can do it at the same time as this business.
Right. And then you quickly realize over time, you're like, no, I don't really need another job, right? So I've got a job in a sense, and There's only 24/7. I think, once you have kids and you got to deal with your kids and all that, you want to deal with your kids, and they take up a good amount of time. First you give up golf, and then you give up, time at work, right? So, but we're empty nesters now, so I can let myself slip into working too long because my wife is out on. I tell my wife I wish I had her social life, right? So if we're empty nesters and your spouse is busy with other things, you'll let yourself slip. And honestly, I'm trying to go home earlier all the time, right? So it's all good. But I think everybody develops their own little techniques, right? So I just try to. My technique is to do a lot. I do 2 lists all the time: my work list and my home list, and I make myself try and focus on my home list more lately, right? So okay, yeah, I could work another hour, but I'm going to go home and knock this out, get that done at home, kind of the personal level stuff, and that's my little. I trick myself maybe on that, So it's all good.
I'm going to let you get out of here and focus on your home list, but kind of one additional question: where do you turn to learn new things or learn about better methods to manage your business?
Yeah, great question. I read a lot about. I try to keep my eyes and ears open from reading a lot of different online and publications. I mean, you can find everything now, right? To keep my eyes open and look for things, like the big question I'm looking at right now is with the millennials, like instead of spending $2,500 a month at each store for credit card fees, should I put a credit card charge on for a credit card pay? Right? So, people my age were like, oh, I just won't do that, right? But, I asked my son that, and he's like, no, you don't even have to tell anyone, Dad. None of us carry cash. We're going to pay it. We may not love it, but because I had a credit card company and pitching me on that, and I'm like, you got to give me examples, right? So, I'm trying to keep up on things like that. Social media is a tough thing to keep up on, but yeah, we were actually in theory early adopters of social media. I remember somebody came in and said, for just $5,000, we can start a Facebook page for you guys. So I'm like, we'll do that ourselves. But so we were early adopters of all of that, which, was from just keeping your eyes open and seeing those things, right? It's interesting because I'm kicking it around about taking 2 things right now. I was going to go back to Ohio State even at my old age, and I was like, hey, what do you think the kids would do? Would they make fun of me, kind of a thing? But I want to go back and do. Ohio State has a data analytics course, which is fairly intensive, and I wasn't sure I could put the time into it, but I may yet go do that. And they have of course, everything. The new thing that's on everybody's mind is AI. Right. So they also offer an AI course, and you can get that to, probably in a number of places. But, the best thing you can do if you're a business owner and you're up there in some age, and I don't feel old at all, but is, what's the cutting new thing, right? And AI is clearly that. Streaming sales is another thing, right? So you just got to get yourself out there and put yourself into some new worlds that are uncomfortable. And be that learning entity again. Yeah. So.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate it, and I'd love to have you back because I know there's so many stories and so many pieces of insight I could take from your business. But where can people find you, or where can people find your stores?
Just go to DFWH.com, Discount Fashion Warehouse. You'll find all our stores there. And we're out there. We're learning how to promote retail still to this day, and getting better at it. But our secret weapon is that most people who come into our stores love it. And if you come into my store new, I've got a 90% chance that you're coming back, and that's a good thing, right? So we're trying to get more people discover us out there. But hopefully, DFWH.com, and you'll find all of our store locations.
Okay, absolutely. How did we do? Or is there a book following this?
No, I'm tired talking. It's all good. Yeah, this was great, man. I really appreciate it. So.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you, man.
Yep. Thanks.